Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. As the game of chess is played on an 8 by 8 grid, patterns and geometries are inherent in the game. Sometimes patterns can emerge during a game that can be beautiful, that can be unexpected, or even can be ugly. In this game, something whimsical emerged in the game that I couldn't help but smile, and I hope it will put a smile on your face as well. All right, let's begin by having a review. So this is a chess.com algorithm. I played fairly well in this game, 91.2% accuracy, somewhat more accurate than my opponent in this game. I had sort of a good mix of good play, couple of inaccuracies, but no mistakes or blunders. And I took a reasonable lead at the beginning and kept that lead throughout the game. Let's now look at the analysis. All right, so I played white, opponent black, and I started with e4. Opponent played e5, and the opponent starts with a unusual gambit. So in this game, I developed my king's knight first, so knight to f3, and immediately the opponent advances the f pawn to f5. I suppose, potentially attacking, aiming to attack my king's pawn, and also inviting me to take. And apparently this is the Latvian Gambit. Now, I'd never seen this gambit before in this opening, so I couldn't see there was any particular problem with potentially taking one of these pawns. But I felt that it might be better to try to keep the center. So I took with the knight. So knight captures pawn on e5. The opponent now develops their knight to f6. Now sort of two attackers, I suppose, on my pawn. And at this point, I developed my other knight to c3. The opponent develops their other knight. I thought, look, I might as well start to liquidate pieces. I just had a sense that the opponent's gambit was not good, and I might as well try to capitalize on whatever gains that I have and try to act fairly aggressively. Opponent captures back with the pawn, with the d-file pawn. So now damaging their potential pawn structure, though opening up the file for their queen. I push my e-pawn forward to avoid the attack by the pawn and also attacking the knight. The opponent brings out their queen. I defend with the d-pawn to d4. The opponent now moves their knight out of the way to d5. And again, in this position, I thought it might be best for me just to try to liquidate their pieces, given that I've got some material advantage. So knight captures knight, opponent captures back with the pawn undoubling their pawns. I now bring out my queen, given that the opponent has moved their f-pawn for check. Opponent decides to move their king. I actually expected them to block with the queen and that we would have a queen trade. But no, the opponent chooses to lose castling rights. I thought, that's interesting. So I captured that that hanging pawn. Opponent moves their king back, which is a good move, but by this stage, I'm really commanding a lead. I think the opponent, whatever the Latvian gambit is, I don't think it's worked. Again, now, given that I'm now 2 points of material ahead and I think I'm further developed, I'm quite happy now to force a queen trade. Opponent must capture now. And there we are. So I develop my bishop to d3, opponent develops their bishop. I now support my advanced e-pawn with f4. The opponent advances their g-pawn with an attack. Here I just thought might as well just move forward, given that square is already defended with an attack on the bishop. The opponent retreats the bishop. And I push forward my g-pawn to support my f-pawn. The opponent now moves their flank pawn to h5. And again, I now have the opportunity to attack their bishop again. Opponent retreats. The opponent moves their bishop to b4 with check. That doesn't really work. And here I have connect 5 in pawns. And this was just something that made me smile, maybe giggled a little bit. Not sure I actually did giggle in the actual game, but beautiful bit of geometry here. And with this long pawn chain, I've practically just cut the board in two, and I've got a command of the space on the king side, and the opponent's pieces are really trapped, I think, on the other side of the board. And I was fairly sure here in this position that I was doing very well, that I was winning. And that appears to be the case with the Stockfish evaluation. Now, the opponent, of course, must move their bishop, and this pawn on g5 is basically just hanging. So they move their bishop to a5. I sort of chase the bishop away again, and now I capture that pawn on g5 with the bishop. The opponent decides to capture my pawn there, no big problems. Move the king out of the way. The opponent, tries to launch an attack on my bishop. I can just retreat the bishop and providing ongoing support to these pawns. Opponent tries to develop a pawn, but now I've got an attack on the pawn and the opponent's rook. They try to move to launch attack on my bishop, but again that doesn't really work, and the opponent is in serious trouble here. And at this point, the opponent actually opted to resign, and I am in a commanding lead. That long chain of pawns, so connect 5, wonderful to see in a game. Good game. GG to the opponent. This was a game with an unorthodox opening, an unusual gambit, which resulted in my pawns effectively slicing the board in two. The power of my long pawn chain meant that even though when the opponent resigned in the mid-game and was only 2 points of material down, the evaluation by Stockfish was +10, a dominating winning position. To quote 18th century French chessmaster Philidor, "To play pawns well, they are the soul of chess. It is they which uniquely determine the attack and the defense, and on their good or bad arrangement depends entirely the winning or losing of the game." I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.